that sound
Mm.
and the smell, that amazing, unmistakable crunch. It's something, isn't it? A food experience that you find pretty much everywhere across time.
It absolutely is. There's something almost primal about it, universally appealing.
Definitely. So today on the deep dive, we're going beyond just, tasty food. We're going deep into the surprisingly complex world history of deep frying. Our mission, really, is to figure out how this seemingly simple cooking method became this huge global thing shaped by technology, farming, culture, even politics.
And we've really dug into a lot of sources for this one. We're talking archaeological finds, ancient recipes, some of the oldest known historical accounts, and even modern science.
So you listening should get ready for some aha moments, maybe some facts that'll make you look at your next plate of fries or, that crispy chicken a bit differently.
Absolutely.
Okay, so to kick things off, let's get specific. We say frying, but what makes deep frying, deep frying?
Right. Good question. It's really about full immersion. Cooking food completely submerged in hot fat or oil. That's the key difference from, say, shallow frying or sautéing, where you just use a little bit of fat.
Got it. Full immersion. And why has this method stuck around for so long everywhere? What's the fundamental why behind it?
Well, it seems to be a mix of really practical advantages and just pure sensory pleasure. Think about it before refrigerators. Deep frying was actually a great way to preserve food.
Preserve? How does that work?
The intense heat drives out moisture from the surface and creates this kind of protective crust, almost a seal. It made food last much longer.
Wow, okay, preservation first. I hadn't thought of that. And I guess it's pretty quick, too.
Exactly. Oil transfers heat super efficiently, so food cooks fast and evenly from all sides at once, which, later became absolutely critical for the whole fast food industry.
Makes sense. But beyond the practical stuff.
Beyond that, it's the magic of the Maillard reaction and caramelization happening on the surface.
Yeah.
That's what gives you that amazing golden brown, crispy outside, while keeping the inside tender and moist. That texture, that flavor, that's the core appeal.
That's the crunch. Okay, so it's practical, it's delicious, but did it start in one place, like one inventor? Or was it more spread out?
Yeah, that's one of the really fascinating things we found. It's not a straight line from one starting point. The history seems more like a complex pattern. Different cultures discovering it independently.
Really?
You've got fried doughs showing up in ancient Mesopotamia and Canaan, these little tiger nut cakes being fried in Egypt, barley fritters in Vedic India, all around similar ancient periods, seemingly without, learning it from each other.
So multiple independent sizzles lighting up the ancient world. Okay, let's dig into those roots. Back around, 5,000 BCE. What did they actually need to start doing this?
Two big things were essential. First, technology. You needed pots that wouldn't crack under direct heat, so heat-resistant pottery. And second, agriculture had to provide reliable sources of fat for cooking. Animal fat, oils. Without both of those, no deep frying.
And Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, they were in on this early?
Seems like it. Pottery that could handle heat shows up there between 8,000 and 5,000 BCE. They're credited with the first frying pans, and some finds even hint at something like a primitive deep fryer from the 4th millennium BCE. It'd be a bit careful with labels like that, but it suggests they were using hot fat pretty seriously early on.
And the fats, what were they actually using?
Rendered animal fats were common: pig, sheep. But Mesopotamia was also big on sesame cultivation, so sesame oil was one of the very first seed oils made in large quantities for cooking.
The olive oil.
Olive oil was around, but more of an import, a luxury item, it seems. Not the everyday frying fat back then there.
So they had the pots, they had the fat, but the earliest written recipes, like those Yale cuneiform tablets from around 1750 BCE, they don't actually mention deep frying much. They're mostly stews.
That's right. Those tablets are overwhelmingly about boiling and stewing. But the lack of written recipes doesn't mean it wasn't happening. There's other evidence, those frying pans we mentioned, the fat sources, even texts talking about street vendors selling fried fish.
Ah, okay.
So it strongly suggests frying was common, just maybe not the kind of thing you wrote down on the fancy cookbooks, which focused on more elaborate dishes. And importantly, Mesopotamia is often credited with the world's first fried dough, around 2000 BCE. Probably street food.
Right. So maybe the everyday food didn't make it into the official record as much. What about Egypt? Did they leave clearer clues?
Egypt is much clearer, actually. We have visual proof. Frying shows up in images as early as 2500 BCE, the Old Kingdom. And there's this amazing scene in the tomb of Vizier Rekhmire, from around 1450 BCE in the New Kingdom.
What does it show?
It shows workers making these little cone-shaped things and frying them in a pot of hot fat. People have actually recreated them based on analysis. They think they were tiger nut cakes made from ground tiger nuts, dates, and honey, then fried.
Wow, actual pictures. And the choice of oils was pretty wide too, wasn't it?
Yeah, even more diverse than Mesopotamia. They had animal fats, palm oil, but also oils from sesame, radish seed, safflower, even something called the ben tree. Olive oil, again, was known, but seems to have been mostly for lamps, cosmetics, rituals, not so much everyday cooking early on.
So Mesopotamia, Egypt, any other ancient hotspots for frying?
Definitely. Over in Canaan, texts mention something called zalabia, basically a deep-fried dough fritter by the late 2nd millennium BCE. So that idea was spreading or popping up independently.
And India?
In Vedic India, around 1500 to 800 BCE, you have mentions in the Rig Veda of a pupa. These were barley flour cakes, fried in ghee, that's clarified butter, and sweetened with honey. The texts imply using a lot of ghee, which strongly suggests deep frying, probably one of the world's earliest deep-fried desserts.
Okay, so the big picture from antiquity is get pottery that can take the heat, get a reliable source of fat, and boom, people start deep frying things. Not one invention, but kind of a recurring solution, especially fried dough.
Exactly. It just made sense. High energy, tasted good, relatively quick. It popped up all over.
All right, let's jump forward to the classical world, Greece and Rome. Say 500 BCE to 500 CE. Olive oil really becomes central here, doesn't it?
It really does. In Greece, especially from the 5th century BCE onward, olive cultivation was widespread, so olive oil became the main frying fat. We even find these clever terracotta frying pans from the earlier Mycenaean period.
And you mentioned something about the Olympics.
Ah, yes. Loukoumades, those little Greek honey donuts. There are accounts suggesting they were given out as honey tokens to Olympic victors way back in 776 BCE.
Olympic donuts. I love that. Okay, and the Romans, they built this huge empire. How did frying fit in?
Oh, it was everywhere in the Roman Empire. From the street food stalls, the thermopolia, selling snacks to the masses, right up to the fanciest elite kitchens.
Do we have Roman recipes?
We do. The most famous collection is De Re Coquinaria, often linked to Apicius. It's the oldest cookbook that survived intact. And it definitely has fried dishes, like Pullus Lucosomus, that's chicken fried in, and it specifies abundant Spanish oil. Clearly implies deep frying.
Not just chicken, I assume.
No. There are recipes for globy little ricotta fritters, basically served with honey and poppy seeds. And the recipe actually gives you a choice. Fry them in vegetable oil, olive oil, or lard.
Lard, too. Interesting.
Yeah, and simple stuff like fried vegetables, pastinaca fricta, fried parsnips, were common snacks at those street stalls.
So they used both olive oil and lard. Was one seen as better, or did it depend on who you were?
It seems lard was often liked for frying, maybe because it had a higher smoke point and added a certain flavor. But yeah, your choice of fat was definitely a status thing. Cheap oils for the workers, maybe, versus pricey imported Spanish olive oil for the rich. It clearly marked social standing.
Okay, this is where it gets really counterintuitive for us. Our sources talk about this Roman crunch myth. We love crispy fried food today, but the Romans maybe didn't.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Roman recipes often tell the cook to pour sauce or some kind of liquid back over the fried food right before serving it.
Which would make it soggy.
Exactly. It would soften any crisp crust. So the thinking is they weren't necessarily aiming for that shattering crunch we crave. They might have prioritized cooking the food all the way through and, importantly, getting that rich flavor from the fat infused into the food itself.
So our idea of the perfect fried texture isn't universal across history. That's wild.
It really shows how much taste is culturally learned and changes over time. A great reminder.
Okay, that Roman non-crunch is a fantastic detail. Let's shift east now. China and Japan, huge culinary traditions, but they took pretty different routes with deep frying, right? Let's start with China.
Right. Early Chinese cooking for a long time was really focused on wet heat boiling, steaming, stewing. Animal fats like lard and tallow were the main cooking fats.
But things changed.
Big changes happened during the Han Dynasty. That's 206 BCE to 220 CE. That's when vegetable oils like sesame and hemp started becoming more common. And crucially, you see the first wok-shaved pans appearing and cast iron cookware becoming more affordable and widespread.
The wok. So that opened up new ways of cooking.
Absolutely. While deep frying, which they call za, definitely existed, it was stir frying, or che, that really took off, especially in the Song and Ming dynasties.
Why stir frying over deep frying?
It seems largely economic, actually. As Chinese cities grew, fuel like firewood became more expensive. Stir-frying in a wok, with ingredients cut small, is incredibly fast and fuel efficient. It was a smart adaptation.
Makes sense. Did China develop its own iconic fried doughs like we saw elsewhere?
Oh, yes. And one of them, yuqiu, often called oil sticks, has this incredible origin story linked to political protest.
Protest. How?
The story goes, back in the Southern Song dynasty, people were furious with a chancellor named Qin Hu, blaming him for the death of a famous general. So cooks supposedly started making 2 strips of dough, representing Qin Hui and his wife, twisted them together, and threw them into boiling oil as a symbolic punishment.
Wow.
It was originally called oil-fried hui, and it's still a super popular breakfast food today. It's amazing how food can carry that kind of history and symbolism.
Truly incredible. Okay, now Japan. When we think Japanese fried food, we think tempura. But you're saying it wasn't originally Japanese?
That's right. Deep frying wasn't really a core part of traditional Japanese cooking. Tempura actually arrived in the 16th century with Portuguese missionaries and traders. This was during the Nanban trade period when Japan had a lot of contact with Europeans.
And the name tempura.
It likely comes from the Latin word tempura, referring to the ember days or times of fasting like Lent in the Catholic calendar when people would avoid meat and eat things like fried fish or vegetables instead.
So it started as a foreign Lenten dish. How did it become the super delicate thing we know today? That seems like a huge leap.
It was a long process, over about 2 centuries. Early tempura, like in Nagasaki where the Portuguese first were, was apparently quite different. A thick, heavy batter, sometimes sweetened, often fried in lard, much more like a European fritter.
Okay, so not light and crispy at all.
Not initially. But Japanese chefs gradually transformed it. In the Kyoto region, it evolved into a refined vegetarian version called shojin tempura. Then the big changes happened in Edo, that's old Tokyo, in the late 18th century.
What happened in Edo?
It became popular as a street food, often using fresh seafood from Tokyo Bay. Chefs started serving the seasoning on the side as a dipping sauce instead of in the batter. And crucially, they figured out how to make that incredibly light, almost lacy batter.
How did they do that?
The secret was minimal mixing, just enough to combine the ingredients and using ice-cold water. Both techniques limit gluten development in the flour, which is what keeps the batter light and crispy instead of tough or bready. It became all about highlighting the natural flavor of the ingredients, covered in this delicate, crunchy veil. A real culinary masterpiece of refinement.
From heavy fritter to airy art form. Amazing. Okay, let's swing back west to medieval Europe and the Middle East, say 500 to 1500 CE. Europe had this great fat divide.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The map was pretty clear. The Mediterranean South stuck with its tradition of olive oil because olives grow well there.
And the North?
Northern Europe, because of the colder climate, relied much more on animal fats, lard from pigs, butter from cows, and also some nut oils.
So climate dictated the fat. Anything else?
Religion played a big role too. The Catholic Church had lots of lean days or fasting periods where meat and animal products were forbidden. This created a huge demand of the North for non-animal fats. People either had to import expensive olive oil from the South or use local vegetable oils like rapeseed oil, even if they weren't always preferred for flavor.
Interesting. So what were people frying across Europe back then?
Well, those fried doughs continue to evolve. You get things like Krapfen in Germanic areas, kind of like donuts. Funnel cakes show up around the 13th century. Medieval cookbooks have recipes for sweet fritters, like apple fritters in Italy, and also savory ones, like herb fritters in England, sometimes served with a drizzle of honey.
And the ancestor of fish and chips, where does that come in?
The roots seem to lie in Spain and Portugal around the 13th century. Cookbooks from that time have early recipes for deep-fried fish. This tradition is often linked to Sephardic Jewish communities there, who had a practice of frying fish on Fridays to eat kol on the Sabbath when cooking was forbidden.
Ah, so it was a way to prepare food ahead of time for religious observance.
Exactly. And that tradition of frying fish seems to have traveled, likely with Jewish refugees, to places like the Netherlands and eventually England, laying the groundwork centuries later for the iconic fish and chips.
Fascinating link. Now, while Europe was dividing its fats, the Middle East was apparently having a golden age of frying.
It really was. Yeah. Medieval Arab cuisine, particularly from the 10th to 13th centuries, took frying to a whole new level of sophistication. The cookbooks from that era are incredible, showing a huge repertoire of fried dishes.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Okay, you have sambusaj, sound familiar? It's the direct ancestor of the samosa. Little triangular pastries, often filled with meat or nuts, and praised in texts as the tastiest food for the hasty diner.
Sambusak, samosa. Okay, I see it. What else?
There was tabahicha, which was thinly sliced meat, fried. It was even sometimes prescribed by doctors for certain ailments. And kataif, these amazing fried pancakes, often stuffed with nuts or cheese and then soaked in syrup. They were so popular they inspired poetry.
Wow, poetry about fried pancakes. And falafel.
Falafel, which likely originated in Egypt, maybe even earlier with Coptic Christians as a meat substitute during Lent, really spread throughout the Middle East during this period and became a super common street food by the 14th century.
And they weren't just stuck with one type of oil, were they?
No, the cookbook showed they used a wide range sesame oil, almond oil, expensive clarified butter, ghee, sheep's tail fat, and olive oil too. It reflected the vast trade networks and gave cooks lots of options depending on the dish. This Middle Eastern influence then spread far and wide.
Okay, let's cross the Atlantic now to the New World, starting around 1500. This period sees these incredible blends of cuisines, syncretic cuisines, and the African diaspora had a massive impact, particularly with frying.
Absolutely fundamental. Let's start with the plantain. It's actually from Southeast Asia originally, became a staple food across much of Africa, and then was brought to the Americas by European colonizers, largely as cheap, high-calorie food for enslaved African people.
Okay, so the plantain arrives. What about the cooking techniques?
Enslaved Africans brought with them incredibly rich culinary traditions from West and Central Africa, including many techniques for frying, often using palm oil. Think of West African dishes like kelewele, spicy fried plantain, kakara, black-eyed pea fritters, or puff-puff, fried dough balls. These schools and preferences came with them.
And these African techniques met the plantain in the Americas.
Precisely, and that fusion created some of the most iconic dishes of the Caribbean and Latin America. You get tostones or patacones, those savory double-fried green plantain slices. You get sweet-fried ripe plantains, maduros. And in places like Puerto Rico, you get mofongo, where they mash fried green plantains with garlic and often pork cracklings.
These aren't just recipes, then?
No, they're a direct living culinary legacy. They represent the resilience, creativity, and cultural identity of African peoples in the Americas, adapting and transforming ingredients in a new, often brutal environment.
Another really famous American dish, Southern fried chicken. Our sources describe it as this unexpected Scottish-African fusion. How did that happen?
Yeah, it's a fascinating blend. So in the 18th century, Scottish immigrants were settling in the American South. They apparently had a tradition back home of frying chicken, often in lard, which was different from the English who tended to bake or boil their chicken.
Okay, so the Scots brought the frying chicken in fat part. What did African cooks add?
Enslaved African cooks, drawing on their own culinary heritage, which included frying and sophisticated seasoning, took that basic idea and completely transformed it. They're the ones who introduced coating the chicken, often in seasoned flour or batter, before frying it. And they brought the spices, think cayenne pepper, black pepper, giving it that signature crispy, flavorful crust. That combination is what made it Southern fried chicken.
And it became more than just food, right? It had deeper significance.
Huge significance. It was a cherished dish within African-American communities, often served at celebrations, Sunday dinners, church gatherings. And then, especially after the Civil War and Emancipation, it became a really important source of economic independence.
How so?
African-American women, in particular, became known for selling fried chicken and other foods to travelers, especially on train routes, where dining cars were often segregated or non-existent for black passengers. It was a form of entrepreneurship born out of necessity and skill.
A powerful story. Now let's talk about fry bread. This one has a really complex and painful history, according to our sources. It's not ancient at all.
No, not ancient. It's relatively recent and born directly out of trauma and government policy in the 19th century. Specifically, it's linked to the forced displacement of Native American tribes, like the Navajo Long Walk in 1864.
What happened?
When tribes were forced onto reservations or relocated, they were often given government rations that were completely unfamiliar and nutritionally poor, typically things like white flour, sugar, salt, and lard, things they couldn't easily grow or hunt for themselves anymore.
So fry bread came from those rations.
Exactly. Native women, with incredible resourcefulness, figured out how to use these limited, low-quality ingredients to create something edible and calorie-dense to survive. They mixed the flour, salt, and water and fried it in the lard. That's fry bread.
So it carries this really heavy dual meaning?
Absolutely. On one hand, for many Native people today, it's a powerful symbol of survival, resilience, identity, community. It represents the ingenuity of their ancestors. It's served at powwows and family gatherings. But on the other hand,
Yes.
it's also a painful reminder of that history of oppression, of land theft, of forced assimilation. And because it's made from those specific ingredients, refined flour, fat, sugar, is directly linked to the disproportionately high rates of diabetes, heart disease, and other diet-related health problems that plague many Native communities today. So it's both sustenance and symbol, celebration and source of concern. Very complex food.
That really underscores how food can be tied up in history and identity in profound ways.
Yeah.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, another global giant, the French fry. Origins are a bit murky. Belgium or France?
Yes, the debate continues. Belgium argues it started in the Meuse Valley, maybe late 17th century. Supposedly, when the river froze and they couldn't catch fish to fry, they started cutting potatoes into fishy shapes and frying those instead.
And France?
France points to street vendors in Paris, selling fried potato sticks, possibly as early as the 1780s, right around the Revolution. They called them pom neuf.
And why French fries?
Couple of theories there. One is that American soldiers encountered them in French-speaking parts of Belgium during World War I and just called them French fries. Another idea is it comes from the culinary term to French, which means cutting vegetables into long, thin strips.
But however it started, it really took over globally because of the U.S. fast food industry.
No question. McDonald's especially was key. They figured out how to mass-produce frozen fries that could be shipped anywhere and cooked consistently. They made the French fry cheap, reliable, and absolutely central to their global expansion. It became the quintessential fast food side dish.
Okay, that brings us neatly into the industrial age, roughly 1850 onwards. This era saw what our sources call the Great Oil Shift. Lard was out, industrial oils were in.
Pretty much. For centuries, millennia even, the fat you cooked with depended on where you lived and what was available locally. Animal fats, olive oil, nut oils, palm oil. The Industrial Revolution completely changed that game.
What happened to lard? It used to be king.
Several things hit lard. One was the rise of public health campaigns, heavily influenced by researchers like Ansel Keys. His work, particularly the 7 countries study, strongly linked saturated fat intake with heart disease. This led to widespread advice to cut back on animal fats like lard and butter.
That research has faced some challenges since, though, right?
Yes, absolutely. Later analysis pointed out methodological issues and argued Keys might have oversimplified a complex relationship, leading to an overly broad demonization of saturated fats. But at the time, its impact was huge. Another factor was changes in pig breeding. Farmers started breeding leaner pigs for meat, which ironically produced lower quality lard for cooking.
So if lard was declining, what took its place? This sounds like a huge gap in the market.
It was, and industry stepped right in. The big breakthrough was Crisco, launched by Procter & Gamble in 1911.
Crisco wasn't originally food, was it?
No. Procter & Gamble were soap and candle makers. They had this problematic waste product, cottonseed oil, which is basically toxic. But they developed a process called hydrogenation, which solidified the oil, removed the odor and color, and turned it into this snow-white, solid fat that looked and behaved just like lard.
And they marketed it as healthier.
Aggressively.
Yeah.
They pitched it as modern, pure, digestible, and yes, implicitly healthier than old-fashioned lard. It was a massive marketing success and fundamentally changed American cooking. Then soybean oil production ramped up, especially after World War II, partly to meet wartime needs and post-war demand, and it eventually became the dominant cooking oil in the U.S. and globally.
So cheap, mass-produced vegetable oils became the new standard. What about the actual frying equipment? Did that change too?
Hugely. The invention of the modern commercial deep fryer was a game changer for restaurants and especially fast food. In 1918, a guy named J.C. Pittman invented the Pitco Fryolator.
What was special about it?
It had this clever design with a cool zone at the bottom of the oil vat. Little bits of food and breading would sink down there where the oil was cooler so they wouldn't burn and keep circulating and fouling the oil. This meant the oil lasted much longer and the food tasted better, less burnt.
Oh, that makes a huge difference for a restaurant.
Absolutely. It became standard kit. And then you had innovations like Colonel Sanders adapting a pressure cooker into a pressure fryer for KFC. That cut the cooking time for chicken dramatically, from maybe 30 minutes down to just a few. That efficiency is what made the KFC franchise model scalable. So you have this perfect storm, cheap industrial oils plus efficient high-volume fryers. That combination really fueled the global explosion of fried food.
But all this fried food also led to a big modern health debate, didn't it?
Yes, it did. The first wave of concern was mostly about calories and links to obesity. Then, in the late 20th century, scientists really started focusing on trans fats.
Those came from the hydrogenation process used for things like Crisco.
Exactly, particularly partial hydrogenation. Trans fats were found to significantly raise levels of LDL, the bad cholesterol, and lower HDL, the good cholesterol, increasing heart disease risk. This led to huge public health campaigns, labeling requirements, and eventually major food manufacturers reformulating products to remove or drastically reduce trans fats.
But the concerns didn't stop there.
No. More recently, other potential issues have come up. One is acrylamide.
Acrylamide, what's that?
It's a chemical compound that can form naturally in starchy food like potatoes or breaded items when they're cooked at high temperatures, like deep frying or even baking or roasting until very brown. Some studies suggest it might be carcinogenic, although the level of risk in humans from food is still debated.
Okay. And there was something else, aldehydes.
Right. Aldehydes are potentially toxic compounds that can form when certain types of oils, especially polyunsaturated vegetable oils like soybean, corn, sunflower oil, are heated repeatedly to high frying temperatures. They break down and oxidize. These aldehydes have been linked in some research to inflammation and increased risk of heart disease and other problems.
So wait, this is the real paradox, isn't it? The very vegetable oils that were pushed as heart-healthy alternatives to animal fats like lard might actually produce these harmful compounds when you use them for deep frying.
That's the crux of a lot of current debate and research. It seems that fats that are more chemically stable at high heat, fats high in saturated or monounsaturated fatty acids like lard, butter, tallow, but also olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil tend to produce significantly fewer of these potentially harmful aldehydes and other breakdown products during deep frying compared to oils high in polyunsaturated fat.
So maybe the old fats weren't so bad for frying after all.
It certainly complicates the picture and suggests the type of fat really matters, especially for high heat cooking, like deep frying. It's an ongoing area of nutritional science.
Which leads us perfectly to the most recent chapter, the air fryer era. This feels like a direct response to all those health concerns.
It absolutely is. The air fryer was invented by a Dutchman, Fred van der Waay, and Philips launched it commercially around 2010. And despite the name, it's not really a fryer at all.
Right, it's more like a small oven.
Exactly. It's basically a compact, high-powered convection oven. It works by circulating extremely hot air very rapidly around the food. They call it rapid air technology. This creates a crispy exterior that mimics deep frying, but using way less oil, maybe 80% less or sometimes none at all.
And people love the idea. Fried food without the fat.
It caught on incredibly fast. The promise of getting that satisfying crunch with fewer calories and potentially fewer harmful byproducts was hugely appealing. By now, something like 2/3 of U.S. households reportedly own one.
Has it actually changed the food industry?
It's starting to. You see major frozen food companies like Nestle, Purdue, Tyson reformulating their products, things like frozen fries, chicken nuggets, specifically for air fryers. They're adding air fryer instructions to the packaging. It shows how a popular appliance, driven by consumer health trends, can actually push the industry to adapt. It's the latest turn in this long, long history.
What an incredible journey we've taken. Seriously, from clay pots in ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, through Roman sauce-covered chicken, Japanese tempura artistry, medieval fritters, the complex stories of the Americas, the rise of industrial oils and fryers, right up to the air fryer in our modern kitchens. Deep frying really does tell a story about human ingenuity, migration, cultural exchange, economics, technology, everything.
It really does. And through all those changes, different foods, different fats, different techniques, different cultural ideas about what tastes good, there's this one constant thread, isn't there? That fundamental sensory appeal, that transformation when food hits hot fat.
That crisp, golden outside, the moist inside.
That textural contrast, that richness. It seems to be something humans are just wired to enjoy, across cultures, across time.
That perfect, satisfying crunch. It keeps coming back. So, here's a final thought for you to chew on. In this modern age, where we're so focused on health and finding alternatives like the air fryer, what does the fact that we still crave that specific, satisfying crunch of traditionally deep-fried food tell us? What does that enduring allure reveal about our deepest human desires around food, pleasure, and maybe even a connection to all those millennia of cooks who came before us?
Something deep, for sure. A lot to think about next time you hear that sizzle.